Welcome back. So in order to get the dropdown, we have to consider how these guys actually reference to each other. So we're building an SQL database, right? Now, if you haven't touched the SQL database before, this is kind of complex. But we need to figure out how a person combined with a person's data, how do they talk together? What are their references? And I will later on make an SQL tutorial so you guys can see a difference between different databases like the SQL versus a Mongo database, a document-based database. We'll do that later, but right now I'll just try and give you a very quick overview about how a person is bound together with a person's status. I already kind of showed it here a lot, right? Where I say a person has access to a person's status. But what about a person's status? Well, that actually have access to a list of persons. So that's how they're bound together. And how did I come up with that? Well, if you read the diagram here, that's actually how you can see it. So this is a database diagram saying that a person has one person status. So that's, if you read it from the start, from the entity you want to talk about, and then move to the guy you're going to talk about as the second part, and you read it this way, then it says one person has one person status, right? And then you can read it back again and say a person status belongs to 0 to many persons, right? So reading this means that I know that a person is going to have one person status on him, right? And I know a person status is going to have 0 to many persons belonging to those. I hope that makes sense. So that's kind of how I write this in code. So I go in and I say a person status is going to have a list of persons as reference. And if I go back to the person, a single person is going to have one person status as reference. But it's a bit more complex than that. If we really want to use the power of the entity framework, we actually have to explain to this person how he can figure out what status he wants to talk to right now, because there's going to be a list of statuses, right? And he only has one he needs to talk to. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the power of the ID. This guy has a specific ID. Let's say that in this case he had the ID of 1 over here. So this guy has ID 1, right? And the person status has ID 11, just to put in a number there, right? So we want to know that this guy specifically has ID person status ID 1. So let's just, this line right here could be looking something like this. He has an int person status ID of 1. Okay, looking something like this. Let me just make it a bit smaller so it can fit in there. And there we go. So that's what I want to kind of map. I want to map that this guy has a reference to the person status. Okay, I know that's a bit complex maybe if you're not used to it. And if you are used to it, it's way too easy to talk about. But what I want to do here is I want to add a new property, because I want to add a property that explains what I just showed you. I want to add a property that says, well, we're going to have a reference to a person status ID like this. So that's the reference, that's the binding between the two classes. And we want to make this into what we call a foreign key. Okay, so there's actually a data annotation called the foreign key. A foreign key just means that I want to make a key so that I know what person status I'm actually looking at. But why don't you use this one? Well, that's not the key, that's actually the object of the person status. Not only the key, it's everything for a person status. So what I want to do is say this key, when you know who it is, then you can actually pull out everything about the status and you can paste it into the status field down here. Okay, and the way I do that is I say this is the foreign key, but the actual status, I'm going to put that up here as text like this. Now this guy references to actually populating the information down here. This might not make sense yet, but it will when we start putting it into the database. So next lesson, I'm going to try and move forward and use this to actually start storing the person status inside the database. So see you in the next lesson.